We are talking about MicroStrategy and Michael Saylor. Haven't heard from Saylor in a while. Michael Saylor said that recent enforcement actions by U.S. regulators have made it clear that the industry is destined to be Bitcoin focused. In an interview with Bloomberg on Tuesday, he said it's pretty clear that the regulators don't see a legitimate path forward for cryptocurrencies. And so the entire industry is kind of destined to be rationalized down to a Bitcoin focused industry with maybe half a dozen to a dozen other proof of work tokens. Will, tossing this off to you. What do you make of Michael Saylor's comments, given all that Bitcoin he holds?
I don't know. Drug dealer wants to sell drugs, thinks they're good. That's kind of how I see all these headlines, right? Like, we're going to go to the person who has a bag of something and get their opinion on it. And to be fair, Michael Saylor did come into the space in 2020 and purchased Bitcoin and didn't purchase anything else. And they had the ability to purchase anything else, right? Like, they made huge bets on Bitcoin, which sort of shows you that Michael Saylor was in firm control of MicroStrategy. Like, the board wasn't really going to go against him. He had convinced them. So he could have purchased really anything at that point, and MicroStrategy chose to just follow along its one path with Bitcoin and Bitcoin only. Since then, they've only been Bitcoin only, and I think that does show you like some conviction around this, and the conviction that, hey, these other tokens are securities. Like, they had to have some sort of rationale for not investing in other things, especially when these other tokens, namely Ethereum, actually did better on a price basis and a percentage price gain than Bitcoin over that same period, right? There was a lot of incentives for investing in different things versus just Bitcoin. They chose Bitcoin only. So to them, I will give them props for that. That being said, I think a lot of times we just like to confirm our bias. There's a lot of people out there who don't like Ethereum and they continue to shill it as a security or say it's a security, but these people are not securities lawyers. So why should we listen to them? And yet they continue to chirp on Twitter and say that Ethereum is a security when we have so much documentation from the actual people who have the jobs to label what is a security and what's not a security, saying that Ethereum is not. So there's a little bit of a cognitive dissonance there, I'd say, just from the general grouping that he's in. Zach, I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, this is a little bit of wishful thinking, I think, but I think certainly people have come to potentially this conclusion, right? If Bitcoin is the only thing that works in the current sort of infrastructure of the crypto markets, according to at the SEC and Gary Gensler's sort of stated opinion, then one could see a world in which Bitcoin becomes, the dominant factor in those markets. I think new infrastructures will emerge, whether that's like, special purpose broker dealers that can clear a lot of these securities. I think we're seeing that with some smaller players who are getting some of those clearances to do so. And those players may be either gobbled up by bigger players, or bigger players will follow that playbook, right? So I think in the context of the current market infrastructure, a statement like this does make sense, and there is evidence to suggest that may be the case. But I think should we look ahead a few years and we see some of these market infrastructures become updated to account for securities designations for a lot of these assets, then maybe this prediction doesn't ultimately hold true. So I think there's two things at play here when I see this, and there's certainly quite a bit of bag holder bias when you're one of the biggest Bitcoin holders in the world. So that's also certainly in play. But I think this does sort of speak to a bigger thing going on in the Bitcoin community, saying, Gary Gensler has it right. He's wind in our sails as we look to hyper Bitcoinization and Bitcoin being the one true coin. So it is kind of funny, I think, to see sort of that embrace on the Bitcoin side of things of this SEC crackdown. It may be short-sighted. It may be misguided to sort of stand apart and distance from the dirty crypto community. But you are certainly seeing a bit of it unfold with some triumphalism, some chest beating on the Bitcoin side, saying, hey, Gary thinks we're cool. That's great for us. So yeah, interesting to watch this play out. Will, I think I saw your hand, so I'll throw it right back to you.
Kind of another thought on this. So the proof of work part is interesting in this. Michael Saylor said that there might be a few of the proof of work tokens that exist alongside Bitcoin. There seems to be some weird thinking that somehow proof of work is the reason for something being a security or not a security in token land. So everything besides Bitcoin. But historically, if we go back to the arguments that a lot of Bitcoin maximalists and other groups made against Ethereum and other tokens, those were basically calling them securities, but those tokens were still proof of work at the time, right? Ethereum didn't merge to proof of stake till last year. And so we're seeing sort of like these old arguments emerge again against things being labeled as securities, But the basis for that argument has changed. For when back in the day was Ethereum had an ICO and they sold a bunch of Ethereum early to investors, and that's why it was a security in the eyes of Bitcoin maximalists. Now it's changed towards, well, Ethereum is now proof of stake, and so it's a security. And I just think like a lot of this again is just like really fumbled logic. They really are just like bag holding and don't have a thought about why they like something or not. And it's odd to see that repeated from a corporation, right? Especially when they're so Bitcoin friendly, and yet they're like, oh, maybe we could have some other tokens. As long as they're proof of work, though, it just seems like odd. I just want to make a quick note about that. Jen, I'll throw it to you.
You know, when Michael Saylor stepped away from the CEO position, I thought that we would hear less Bitcoin news attached to the MicroStrategy narrative, and we might hear other news coming out of MicroStrategy, but that hasn't really come to fruition, or maybe we only follow the crypto news, so we're biased. But I do kind of feel like maybe he is pumping his bags. He has $4 billion worth of Bitcoin on the MicroStrategy balance sheet. And I want to bring up the last time we spoke about MicroStrategy, Michael Saylor was saying, he's looking at how to incorporate Bitcoin's technology into some of the software that they're building over at MicroStrategy. So I think he's doubling down on this narrative, predicting that Bitcoin's going to hit $250,000 because to him, that is the next logical step. And if I were in his position, maybe I would do the same thing.